Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
We are going to be chatting about Trudeau claiming that fighting climate change is more important than affording basic necessities. Canada's democracy looking like it was assembled as a cheap knockoff in a Chinese Communist Party factory. The PBO saying that the cost of federal bureaucracy has surged 73% during Trudeau's tenure. How media gaslighting created a decade of manufactured culture wars, and Trump picks RFK Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services. All right, so first off, we've got Trudeau claims fighting climate change is more important than affording basic necessities. Justin Trudeau demands Canadians sacrifice affordability for his climate agenda, despite Canada contributing just 1.5% to global emissions. Trudeau dismisses Canadians' financial struggles, prioritizing climate goals over their ability to afford rent, groceries, or transportation. His policies reflect moral grandstanding, forcing hardships on citizens while he faces no consequences for his hypocrisy, including extensive travel and taxpayer-funded luxuries. As Thomas Sowell warned, decisions by unaccountable elites are dangerous, leaving Canadians to bear the cost of Trudeau's delusions. So, what's more important to you, Jonathan? Feeding your newborn son or achieving net zero?
Well, he's still breastfeeding, so feeding my wife to feed my son.
Yeah.
Look, you got to ask where this ends, and it seems like there is no end in sight for these people. Their goalpost keeps moving. Like, you look across the spectrum of issues that we have. We have an affordability crisis. Yes. You look at the number of kids now that are in poverty. I just did a video on it today. It's increased by 5% over the set term. This is the largest increase in Canadian history. You look at the number of kids that are now using food banks. It went up to 1.8 million from 1.4 just last year. The number of people that are suffering in almost every measurable way. And we're the only G7 country that didn't reduce our carbon footprint, even though we're the ones that are being so hard on our society and our citizens. It just doesn't make any sense. Look, like, if you could show me some objective measurement, I would still disagree with you because of Canada's overall carbon footprint. And I still know that the science is out on this whole thing. It's a very gray area. But at least if you could show some objective measurements to stand behind these claims. Like, hey, we've improved by 25%. We're ahead of the rest of the world. What we're doing is good for these reasons. It's literally getting worse. What are we doing?
Well, we were talking the other day just about the depths of evil, right? Think about how deep this goes, where, okay, yes, we're making no progress at all for these goals. We're incurring a lot of cost for trying to achieve them despite not making any progress. But it's necessary for you to continue going down this path of suffering, quote unquote, because my goals that I'm trying to achieve are so noble. That's a crazy mental pattern to be in.
Well, especially without any positive metrics. Like,
that's what I mean.
Yeah. Like, to me, it makes no sense. It's like, it's pure lunacy. But then you got to wonder, like, why? So for me, I don't think he's bright enough to have this grand, like, you look at people that change the way people think on a global scale. You get your Hitlers of the world. You get your Marxes of the world. And the reason I say that is because they fundamentally tried to change the way society operated at scale, which is kind of wild. You and I have talked about this before. That's a pretty significant undertaking. Trying to get a company to think the same way and everybody be on the same page is challenging enough, let alone society at large. He's not that bright. So this has nothing to do with him changing society's thinking at scale. This has to do with him, his ego, and his agenda. That's all that this is. And he just can't keep putting losses on the board. So he's doing whatever he can to stick to this, because you and I both know the Liberals are very committed to this climate change narrative. If he takes his foot off the gas, for any amount of time, it's such a massive, it's basically admission of fault, admission of guilt. He will not do it. His ego will not allow. So honestly, man, like, strap in. This is going to get worse for another, how long is he in there? Another year?
Yeah. So there's some distinctions to make, though, so it's like, I don't think he's an insanely intelligent person crafting these, trying to change human nature on a grand scale like some of these people have before. But there's different types of people within totalitarian systems. And this is what Andrew Lobachowski, that psychiatrist from Poland under the communists, pointed out, which is that there's your typical just psychopaths. These people are just, they know how power operates. They're all about public relations, narcissism, that kind of thing. They're not necessarily the best and brightest the world has to offer. They just know how to manipulate scenarios in their benefit.
Right.
So there's kind of like that, just like raw power hungry type in there. And then he also makes the distinction of people he called schizoids. And that's like what he was using as a medical term. But those were the people that were like coming up with the ideas. And those two people, amongst others as well, there was characteropaths, which he called, which kind of like embody and sell the ideas as like they're kind of like your elites and celebrities that make you want to emulate those totalitarian ideas.
Right.
But so it's like I see Trudeau as kind of in that like psychopath realm where he's just pure power. Like he's just pure narcissism. He just wants the spotlight, all the praise.
Yes.
I don't think he even thinks of himself as probably a particularly smart guy, but he still thinks himself so noble and the world's savior.
I think he's narcissistic enough to believe he's highly intelligent and that we're all idiots. I get enough of that for him. The number of things he says and then just brushes over like it never happened, or he changes his story, that's narcissism.
For sure, but I guess, yeah, narcissists tend to believe that they're extremely intelligent. I just don't know how somebody could stand on stage and be like, I'm numerically dyslexic, and then also think like I'm a genius.
You're a narcissist that suffers from the Dunning-Kruger effect. That's all it is.
I can't do basic math, but I should be in charge of Canada.
But he is and thinks he should be. He's like, I'm going to run again. And then when 24 of his own MPs are like, hey, bro, you got to go. He squashes all them, and then they come out being like, he's our champion, and he's going to win again next time. The fuck did you do to these people?
For sure.
Nah, dude.
For sure.
Yeah, it's a bit of a wild situation. But in terms of how we sort of navigate this over the next 10 to 12 months, unfortunately, I just don't see it getting any better. I don't. And the thing is I think they're incentivizing the wrong things. You kind of look at what's happening with I don't want to go too far off on a tangent here, but you look at how they're putting 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. Now we've dumped $20-30 billion of taxpayer dollars into building EVs and battery plants and stuff like this. So you see, again, they tell us that we have to drive an EV by 2035. I'm just going to tie this all together. So if you're telling me I have to drive an EV by 2035 and I can get cheap EVs from China, but you won't let me buy them because you've put all this money into EV plants in Canada, what's actually happening here? What you're doing is you're putting the tariff on China so that I can't access these things, even though it's to the detriment of society. It's to the detriment of Canadians in this sense, even though I don't totally disagree with the thing with China, but you're not doing it for that reason. You're not doing it to penalize China. You're in bed with them. You're doing it so that your green agenda and the tax dollars you spend on battery plants doesn't make you look like an asshole. It's all self-serving, right? And I think we're going to see more and more of this.
Well, and you continue going down that list, right? You take the whole EV thing into consideration, take the economic arguments away from it. He's still so delusional. Like, you know what? If he doesn't read his intelligence briefings, I'm sure he's also not reading energy reports and stuff. But you go look at, say, the International Energy Agency, and they point out how from the whole lifespan of an EV vehicle compared to a gas vehicle is 24% less carbon in its lifetime from assembly to disposal. So even if you take into consideration that 1.5% Canada number, that really brings down the private vehicle ownership to 0.34% of global emissions in Canada. Global emissions, 0.34% are Canadian private vehicles. And then, okay, so you change the entire 0.34% by 24%. It's like you're making a 0.08% difference in the global carbon emissions if you force through EVs.
Been thought through.
Think about all the costs. And okay, if that's your goal, that's your metric for success is carbon reductions. The amount of cost to benefit is zero.
You can't get there. Like we said, there's no objective metrics that support what's happening right now. Canadians just continue to suffer.
And think about one other thing that is in the back of their minds here while they tell you about how this stuff is more important than feeding your kids, which is the whole corruption aspect, right?
Like you want to see a revolution? Say that to enough parents.
Yeah.
Try me. Are you kidding?
Let them eat cake type shit. Yeah. I don't need to really. Do you know what happened to Marie Antoinette shortly after she said that?
Tell me.
Let's just say the recent Olympics made a symbol of it by holding a head. So it's like that's that karma. It's like you should probably take into consideration that that's where people that think like that end up usually in history. Now, I'm not calling for that. Just want to be clear. But just saying.
We live in different times where we don't cut people's heads off anymore.
Just saying, I can see how dominoes fall. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Canada's democracy resembling a cheap knockoff assembled by the Chinese Communist Party. Canada's government increasingly resembles a fragile, mass-produced knockoff of democracy as if it was assembled in a Chinese Communist Party factory. Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault and other MPs are linked to CCP-affiliated organizations, while provincial leaders direct taxpayer funds to groups mobilizing diaspora communities for political gain. Intelligence agencies suggest the CCP may blackmail Canadian politicians using evidence from illegal casinos and prostitution rings. Meanwhile, woke ideology, echoing Maoist cultural Marxism, permeates schools, media, and policy. Perhaps it's time to ask, is Canada's woke revolution orchestrated by the very same party Mao created, the Chinese Communist Party? So do our institutions resemble communist knockoffs because maybe at their core they truly are?
It's becoming hard to deny, and one of the things that you and I have talked about quite a lot recently, actually, is that democracy is a bit of a fallacy in the sense that I believe it's been compromised in many of the Western nations, Canada included, and we don't know to what depths. We just know that there's some amount that it's been compromised. What that does is that actually takes democracy off the table. If they've compromised the elections, and they tell us the only way to get out of these situations that we're in that aren't good for us are to vote, well, then they've kind of got you by the nuts, right? And that's kind of what I'm seeing happening here. And when you get into that situation, the parties stop operating like a democracy or like your vote or like your voice matters anymore. And they do whatever they want to try to maintain more and more power, right? The nice thing about China is at least they're being straightforward. They're being honest with you. This is what you're in, deal with it. If you talk back, you go to jail. Whereas here they convince us, no, you have a choice, just don't choose the wrong one. That's basically what it feels like, right? And this is what I've been saying lately. I haven't totally given up on democracy in the West. I haven't. And Trump winning was sort of the first step in me being like, okay, I think we still have a chance here. Let's see how this goes for him and all the people he's appointing and stuff like that. We'll see how it shakes out. And the other half, obviously more significant for us, is let's see what happens in Canada. Does Pierre Poilievre win? And when he gets in, does he right all these wrongs? Because if he doesn't, I do not believe in the democracy we have in this country anymore. I will believe that it's completely been compromised by whoever, I guess, paid the most money and that I need to get out of this system. But I do still have faith in it. I just don't have faith in the Liberal Party. I think they are currently completely compromised, just like the Democrats in the States. And again, I don't know who, I don't know to what degree, I don't know who they're in bed with, but you see shit like this. And you see the allowances they make for these countries, especially China. You're going, this doesn't make any sense. And we know that they're involved in our elections, right? And with the U.S., I think it's more corporate vultures, to be honest with you. I think it's more pharma and military industrial complex. I think those are the ones more pulling the strings, if I got to be honest with you, because the amount of money. I think Canada's playing a bit of a different game. But yeah, I mean, it resembles it because it's exactly what it's become. It's just wearing a different dress.
Well, you'll get to a point. You started reading Devil's Chessboard, which is all about the the history of intelligence agencies, specifically the CIA in America. You'll get to a point in that book where he describes a concept that was popularized by a university professor in like the 60s or 70s down in the States. And what he talked about was how where power centralizes, because all these different societies, power does centralize in different places sometimes. Sometimes it's the church. You look at certain areas that it's been that way in the past. You look at communist, whether it be China or Soviet Union, it's the state. The state is where power is centralized. But he was talking about in regards to America, where power is centralized, is kind of this union between Washington, D.C., the military industrial complex, and the banks.
Yes.
Between those three things, you've got force, finance, like force being the military, finance being the banks, and then you've got policy being the government.
Yes.
And propaganda. So that's where power definitely resides in the States. And it's different here. It's a lot more state heavy. We don't have as much private, don't get me wrong. Private interests do have sway, but it's not nearly like what it is down even close. In America.
They're playing with a different amount of dollars down there. That's why it's so significant.
And so, you were talking in that last topic about how you don't really see anything happening until October of 2025. And I agree under current circumstances, but I do think that certain things could unfold in a way where maybe there is, because I do think the best route for change in Canada right now is international pressure from big players. And so I think if Donald Trump, let's say, ends up getting a clear view of how deeply ingrained China is in our institutions, he'll start looking at Canada as a national security issue. Oh, the CCP is running drug super labs in BC and then shipping that fentanyl and opioids right across the border from there into America.
Mhm.
This is a problem we have to deal with now. And now he comes knocking at the door because, we've talked before about how geopolitics is kind of like a chessboard, and you've got your kings and queens and stuff, your very valuable pieces. Those are the China and Russia and America of the world. But then you've got your pawns, which are like the Ukraines and stuff of the world. But then your like more mid-tier level pieces are the countries like China. And so right now, like those pieces aren't just enough to throw away and sacrifice without any gain to be had from it. So the point that I'm getting to here is that like Canada is a national security threat to America at this point. So there very well could become pressure from the outside in Canada to deal with this.
I don't disagree with you, but here's the thing. What everybody's going to do over the next year is the Democratic media machine down in the United States is already mobilizing against Trump and everything he's trying to put together. So they're already going to be pushing against him. Our media is almost completely nationalized. 70% of our media is subsidized by our government, and they bitch over because Orban in Hungary, he's subsidizing 80%. It's like, we're almost no better. We just agree with the West. Cool, fine. So if they're pushing back against Trump down there because he's the bad guy, according to the media, and we're going to do the same thing here. You look at CBC articles today, they're ridiculous what they're saying about him. These guys are just idiots. But you look at that, you go, okay, cool. So even if Trump starts to put pressure on our government here, our media is just going to blow up. We're under attack by a fascist Nazi. That's what they're going to say. That's what these idiots are going to say, right? So I agree with you, but I think he's got enough trouble of his own putting America first, which I agree with his strategy, that if he starts to focus on how he's going to, break apart the CCP's infiltration of Canada or how he's going to flip the parties or something like that, I think he's going to look at it and go, I can't climb that right now because it comes with a lot of international pressure, a lot of bad media press. I got my own problems to deal with over here. I think at least the first year.
I don't think Trump has ever held back out of fear of bad media press.
Well, no, I agree with what you're saying, but it's also like you can only fight a war on so many fronts. Let's put it that way, right? So that's kind of what I'm saying is they tried to overwhelm him with lawsuits from every angle. He was able to deal with it. But I think he's learned from the first time around, like, I got a really tough year ahead of me, in navigating all these changes, implementing. And that's all Trudeau's going to be here for. So he might say a thing or two, a backhand comment. It might implement some sort of new border policies, which I probably can appreciate. But I think that's as far as it will go, at least in the first year anyway. So if Trudeau somehow got reelected, yeah, I could see him unleashing. But I don't think that's going to, if Trudeau gets reelected, I think every capable Canadian, they're moving south anyway.
Even you just think about it though. Okay, even if he doesn't do any massive policy or anything, like there's US congressional reports. And again, there's so many of these things that I don't expect every public servant or to have seen them. But there's definitely US congressional reports that talk about, and this is something that even Sam Cooper has talked about before in the past, where like China literally looks at Canada as an entry point into America.
For sure.
It's like Canada isn't their ends. It's a means to get to America. But what I'm saying is, even if he doesn't want to go into, say, full-blown like diplomatic warfare with Canada, kind of like we're currently doing with India or something of that matter, and doesn't want to cause a big ruckus, all it takes for him is to be in a press conference and be like, hey, Trudeau, why are you guys sending bioweapons to China before the COVID pandemic? All of a sudden, every media outlet in the entire world is talking about Trudeau in the bioweapons. Yeah,
but I think there's a couple of things you have to consider though, right? Like Mexico and Canada are America's largest trading partners. Combined, they contribute over 31% of the goods that go to America right now. It's too big. And they take 68% of our goods. That's why there's this big chitter chatter about the tariff situation, right? So I just think like it's too disruptive, in my opinion, and not really worth it. And he is a shoot from the hip kind of guy that could say something silly like that. I agree. But if there's any strategy involved whatsoever, I just think that's something that happens further down the road, because what I've been hearing from them more so is they don't like Trudeau, they don't like his government, but they like Canada, and they're going to work with the next group. That's kind of what I'm picking up so far. So I feel like Trudeau would have to do something offensive, in particular, once Trump is in office. So, you look at the overlap of 10 months to really instigate some kind of pushback. Because I think he'll be like, shut up, you're just a fly on the wall. I don't care what you say or what you do. You know what I mean? I think that'll be his approach if Trudeau stays quiet. And we'll just see what kind of balls he has, because Trudeau once in a while does say something stupid to try to stand out, and his PP gets slapped every time he does it. So we'll see how it goes. But unless he does something like that, I think that there's too much at stake, and I think it's an error on Trump's part. So I just don't think they'll do anything significant. That's all.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got the parliamentary budget officer saying that the cost of federal bureaucracies has surged 73% during Trudeau's tenure. Federal bureaucracy under Justin Trudeau has exploded to $69.5 billion annually, a 73% increase since 2016, while performance remains dismal. Fewer than half of targets are met. The workforce has grown by 42%, vastly outpacing Canada's 14% population growth, resulting in 108,793 new employees. Taxpayers have funded $1.5 billion in bonuses since 2015, despite no improvement in services. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation warns this bloated bureaucracy is driving higher prices, more debt, and public frustration as the federal deficit climbs to $46.8 billion. Nearly half of Canadians now support reducing government staff to address inefficiency and fiscal irresponsibility. So, how long can Canada's economy survive with this bureaucratic tumor?
It's kind of like he's stacking the deck in his favor. It's kind of what it seems like he's trying to do. You just put more and more people on your payroll to keep everybody happy and to keep them quiet. What is it, like 20% of the Canadian workforce is now a government employee? I know it's not all federal, but I think that's accurate. And I remember that's
something like that.
Yeah, and that's more than doubled since I was younger. It's ridiculous. And there's this sweet spot. I forget who put this formula together. There's a sweet spot between the size of government spending versus your GDP and how much, and the size of your population. And I think we're over double the percentages on both of those things now, on government spending and size of government. I think we've doubled both of the optimal size. And these efficiencies, like the math was built over time, looking at several different, societies over time. So it wasn't just some willy-nilly formula someone threw together. It was actually backed with historical data. This is wildly out of hand. What? 42%? That's the federal workforce. You got to think about this. Okay. So the federal workforce supports that's really the people that bring things to light. They put things into play. The size of the federal workforce being 42% bigger just under Justin Trudeau makes literally no sense at all, because there's no need for the infrastructure. They've done nothing. So for the 200 years prior, the size of our government has only grown to this, and now he increases it by 42% over less than 10 years. This guy has no idea how to run a business. I was in Italy for a week. I can't stop. This guy has no idea how to run a business, and he's running this into the ground. Could you imagine? Like, I run restaurants. If I'm like, you need 3 people on the floor, well, I'm going to put 35. You're going to put 35 people on the floor, Jonathan? Yeah, I don't care about it. It's not my money. That's what this guy's doing. That's what this guy's doing. This is a business, and he's running it into the ground. And I got to be honest with you, the bonus shit because I did this video today, that actually pissed me off. Like, I had to redo the video because I was like, I think I'm too angry. Like $1.5 billion in bonuses to federal employees that don't even meet 50% of their targets. All of you would be fired.
Yeah.
You wouldn't get bonuses, but fuck your bonuses. You wouldn't have a paycheck. There's grounds to remove all of you from office. And they're like, I'll just keep adding more. The fuck is happening here?
So, so one of the things you mentioned there about what is he like trying to buy up people, whatever, what's this all for? If you think about it, okay, I've got this grand plan for the way that the world should work. It's the Agenda 2030, this net zero plan. That's what they have. They have this list of 17 goals, right? From equity to gender equality to climate change, all of these different aspects. To achieve their goals, they need to be in charge of everything. And so think about it. The more intensive your plan is, the more administrators you need to administer that plan.
But why are you so inefficient? Why can't you at least improve any aspect of this country instead of making it all worse? It's like we're saying, yeah, go ahead, give it a shot. And you're 0 for 4.
Because they're socialists and they don't believe in economic principles. So when you're trying to run your job,
That is
or
so
sorry, when you're
astounding to hear.
when
Just
you try to run your business, your mind is, I have a certain amount of resources and I need to make sure that my operations run with that limited amount of resources. And then I also need to make sure it runs enough to leave me a little bit to take home at the end of
got to
all
be
of
a net
this.
positive. Yes.
They don't operate on that. They don't, because they don't have to abide by market principles as the state, right? It's they get to take your money and then tell you what they deliver the product for, and they get to monopolize the entire industry of whatever they take control of.
I hate this place. I know it's so.
This is socialism, though. And that's what I'm trying to.
I agree with you. Look, the problem that I have with this, and everybody should have with this, is we live in a democracy that operates in capitalism, and our country is the biggest corporation in the country. It is the country. We need someone that understands business to run this fucking thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is ridiculous. How can the rest of us, under the umbrella of this nonsense, operate in a capitalistic, democratic society if the people over top of it are running like it's socialism and not paying attention to capitalism? Everything under the umbrella is now flawed. There are holes and everything's wet.
You need to check out, after you're done Devil's Chessboard, you need to check out Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
And it's a dystopic novel where she imagines a world that has just become completely overburdened by bureaucracy and regulations to the point where everything is planned, right, in this centrally planned economy. And the heroes of the book are people that essentially withdraw themselves from society and take their productive efforts on strike. And so these people end up going and living in like a land beyond, in the valley, like off the map, where they actually do produce and they trade with one another and all this kind of stuff. But they're like, no, we're protesting. We're fundamentally protesting that world, which is the idea that people can come in and take what I have to fulfill their goals and their projects, like the state can just come in and say, oh, you need to sell us this iron or give us this mountain taxes or whatever, and just completely ruin my ability to be productive. And so they just essentially just give up on society in that sense. And I'm like, that's what they're starting to create.
Yes, yeah. I feel that. Yes.
Yeah.
I think more like parallel economy. Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
It gets very challenging. You know, when you see this kind of stuff, like you have these moments once in a while, and it's often fleeting, but you do kind of look at the grand picture here of Canada and, you know, this country and how poorly it's being run and what it means for everybody else here. Everyone that's going to work every day to try to make a difference or try to make something of themselves or find their purpose or live a great life. And then you have this asshat at the top that's just snatching it away from everybody because he's got some socialist view or ideology he's trying to bring to life, but he's actually too stupid to know how to do really any of it. And he continually shows us how stupid he is by not being able to execute on one project successfully. Not one. It's just tough sometimes. Like, I get it. It's like you don't want to think about it too much because it takes the wind out of your sails. But once in a while, you want to hear about it because it motivates you to make change. It's the
beta region paradox.
It's the region beta paradox.
Beta region.
Region beta. Yeah, it's the region beta paradox. Yeah. So yeah, I did some more research on it.
But so one of the things with going, just circling back to,
to be honest with you, the beta region sounds better, but it's region beta. It does sound way better, but it's not what it is.
So just one last thing I want to cap off there was the hero of the story is this guy named John Galt, who is like a genius who created the engine, but he purposely doesn't give it that technology to the world because he doesn't think they deserve it. But so he creates the motto, the creed that everybody in this valley lives by. And it goes, I swear by my life and my love of it that I will never live for the sake of another man, nor ask another man to live for mine. And this is what I'm starting to realize is it's not left versus right and all this kind of stuff. It's a fundamental difference of values of whether the individual exists for the sake of society and the collective,
yes,
or whether mutual interest, the collective, exists for the sake of the individual to take advantage of. So their whole philosophy in this valley is that, look, you have your self-interests, I have mine. I don't get to tell you that my interests trump yours, but where our interests align, we can collaborate.
Coexist, yes.
And but that's not at all what the people that are currently in charge of things in our institutions believe. It's that they believe they should be able to tell any single individual. This goes back to the very first topic of Trudeau and the climate goals, right? Is I get to set your priorities for you. I get to tell you what's important and what's worth working towards.
Whether your children starve or not.
Right.
And that's the problem I have with like, it's interesting, like that's a good perspective. And what I would do to just expand on it a little bit is it's not left versus right. And you and I are politically agnostic and primarily libertarian.
Mhm.
But right now we are right wing because we know we need a conservative government, but it's not because of policy. It's because they push towards individual freedom. That's the fundamental difference is the liberals and the Democrats right now are driving the ship towards socialism and what's good for the group. And the rest of us, anybody who's thinking sanely or logically these days wants to go the opposite direction. And that's why politics to me are so important right now.
There's this guy on Twitter that's very brilliant, but he puts things into a very brash way. And I posted on my Instagram stories the other day. I don't know if you saw it, but it said it's pie charts of who makes up the left and right now. And on the left, half of it is just retarded psychopaths. A quarter of it is retarded psychopaths with fake degrees in gay crying or victim studies. And then a large portion of it is sheltered, naive, rich white people who think being nice makes people be nice back. And then it's regular psychopaths and classic liberals who have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
That's the left. And then on the right, you've got stereotypical conservatives. These are your country music, simple folk type. You've got your stock market conservatives, the materialists, the Wall Street types. And then you've got a large chunk of people who is just former leftists who realized they were surrounded by retarded psychopaths. And then a sliver of the pie on the right is autodictatic philosophers who found the source code of reality and must translate it for the masses before it's too late. And I'm like, that's a pretty accurate view of what's going on.
He's right. Yeah.
Because you look at this and you go, okay, like under no, there is definitely say right-wing commentators or this kind of thing, but you look at somebody like Brett Weinstein and you're like,
yeah,
he fits into that philosopher realm where it's like he's getting lumped in with the right, but he's like, he's not really right-wing in any real sense.
He was almost forced over there because the left got so crazy.
Exactly.
That's where I think a lot of them have come from lately,
Mhm.
especially a lot of the ones that are outspoken, because primarily the people that were outspoken before that were right-wing were squashed. A lot of voices were silenced over the last, decade for a number of reasons. But when you get the guys like the Rogans and the Weinsteins that split off, is they were traditionally liberal. They were
Right.
RFKs, like these guys, they're trying to squash the voices now, but now there's too many people that are hyper intelligent that just kind of understand the logical sort of how society works and what's going on. And they're explaining it. You can't squash all those voices. So it's like the loudest ones now used to be on the left.
I voted for Trudeau and Singh. I voted for both of those. Again, 2015 and 2019. I didn't pay attention to any of this at that time. Again, I was the clueless liberal who had no idea what was going on. The classic liberal who has no idea what's going on. And my whole idea of politics is like, yeah, I should be able to smoke weed on the street. Like that's, yeah, bro. It's like that was what the majority of the country thought at that time. And it is wild to look back at it, with what I know now and what I knew then. I wasn't passionate about it either, though.
No.
To me, it was very similar, just like walking into the booth and just being like, all right, all these, like, I didn't know necessarily the differences between them as much.
Well, again, I think that they were more ideologically aligned in the past,
Mhm.
but now they're not. Now it's a very dangerous time. But to my point previously, now they're very opposite directions. They're not driving side by side with different ideas on how to get there. They're going in opposite directions. So now you have to pay attention. That's all.
Well, and this leads us into our next story of how we got there. So, how media gaslighting created a decade of manufactured culture wars. Over the past decade, a media-induced woke reign of terror created a mass psychosis in Western nations, driven by college-educated elites wielding powerful propaganda. As Michael Schellenberger notes, terms like racist and white privilege skyrocketed in media after 2012, fostering false narratives that the West was more racist than ever. This cultural hysteria allowed governments to exploit division, consolidating power through authoritarianism, spiraling debt, and causing economic ruin. Schellenberger highlights the totalitarian tactics, politicizing everything, silencing dissent, and weaponizing institutions. So, looking back with all that we know now, what do you think is the craziest story or topic that the population has been gaslit into believing?
COVID's been the one that pulled the wool over everybody's eyes. But what's so interesting is it showed, yes, their potential and how strong or how potent a weapon the media has become. How people will give up on logic to be a part of the crowd, to follow in other people's footsteps, so they're not on their own or harpooned on the island, as I'll say sometimes. But also, it really did create a separate divide of critical thinkers. So someone was explaining this to me the other day, and a kind of a dummy version, and I was like, okay, yeah, cool. This is like a super simple way of looking at this. But like, there's 3 ways that I think about how the human mind works, and I mean, I'm sure there's more, but this is a good way to understand it. Like breathing or how my lungs work, you can't talk me into stopping those. They're going to continue to work. Then you get into the emotional realm, then you get into the logical realm. But you can kind of work your way down. So you can beat logic with emotion. So as soon as you get into someone's emotional mindset, as soon as you can tap into that, you can take them away from their logical thinking. So you have to have a very strong mind to always stay in that logical space. Now, again, that was a very rudimentary way of explaining it. Why I liked it, though, is it helped me understand something you and I talk about quite frequently, is that everyone seems to have these blind spots where they get overtaken by emotion and logic is gone, right? And that was what was interesting about COVID, is you saw like some of the most brilliant people I've known just turn their back on me, wouldn't talk to me anymore, would cancel me on social media to themselves or whatever. Not cancel, but just, block me or whatever. Because what I was saying didn't comport with their narrative, but I was being logical and using data. I was, but they had to buy into this narrative, whether they'd been vaccinated or whether they just didn't want to believe that this was all some ruse. So you got to see a really interesting divide in society, and then you got to see them all turn. You got to see that the media and the government worked together and the pharma companies, and they got this massive cohort of people that had been convinced to let go of logic and live in the emotional state to turn on the rest of us that were using logic, which then made a lot more people in the logical space shut the fuck up. Because they're like, I believe that this is wrong, but I can't stand up and say anything. So it created even like, you get the Joe Rogans again, to go back to him, where you needed these key people to really, like, they were very important at that time to push back. But what's so interesting now is, in my opinion, they won that battle, but they lost the war, because now politics is shifting very quickly. And this is a big reason why. It's a big reason why Trump's in. Now, a lot of other things too, economics, the country's a mess, whatever. But they're losing the political fight now. But also, people don't trust mainstream media anymore, like at all. Like, they're gone. Like, nobody trusts them anymore. And that's kind of the war that I think that they lost. But if you look at how media gaslighting created a decade of these problems, I would say that is definitely the biggest one.
Yeah, I agree. And you look at the just complete, say, A and B, if you thought about, okay, reality is what the TV is telling me it is, what CNN and CBC and all of this is telling me it is. I should only walk outside in a hazmat suit type of idea. But then if you, let's just say, got transported and you lived a week on Earth and you had no access to a TV, but you just wandered around society, you would have had no idea that there was a pandemic. People weren't coughing and dying in the streets. Like, you'd be like, why are people wearing all these like masks? But it wouldn't have seemed like an emergency. Like, you think back to some of these, say, they talk about past pandemics and all of this kind of stuff. And sure, there's the 7 million number that gets floated around of that's kind of what COVID does. I still don't think we have any idea as to know how many died, because we do know that they were false counting them and just tossing people into that basket.
Oh yeah. But anybody that died with COVID or from COVID, then you got to think about the ventilators, and you got to think, then you go down the vaccine road. It's a totally different conversation.
So how many people really died from it? Who knows? But it's one of those things where you look back at even just the propaganda. You watch these old videos of the news hosts talking about, say, the unvaccinated. This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. The Toronto Star was with egregious. What you know now, and you're like, wow, this even in my mind at the time, I didn't agree with them, but there was still some aspect in my mind where I was going, am I wrong here? Like, I didn't know. Like, it's just confusion, kind of, right? And you can piece a little bit of everything together. Like, I know we were still doing our best, but like, compared to how I can view it now and the look I can take at it now, it's completely different. But it's just with everything we know now, especially after what came out with the Twitter files and what they were working with censorship and all this kind of stuff, everything that we suspected was happening, it's just like, oh, wow, that actually happened. And that's what's so crazy to look back at it, is the gaslighting. Be like, there was a global gaslighting campaign for people to lock themselves in their home, and there was no immediate threat to them.
They did a really good job, but I think that they overplayed their hand. And I think it's like, again, nobody trusts mainstream media. And I know this sounds crazy, maybe a little hyperbolic. I don't think it is. But because Elon Musk owns Twitter, they don't own social media. They can't shut it down anymore. And they just lost. Like, they did not have as much control over the narrative as they thought. They did for a short period of time while people were afraid. But then when people stopped being afraid and started paying attention, a lot more people left the emotion, came back to the logic, and now they're pissed. Now I would say it's 50-50 or more like 60-40 that are living back in that space of logic. It's not happening again. People, because I was of the mind. So for me, I kind of saw COVID for what it was by the third lockdown. And that was, you know, when I really started getting a little upset and speaking out. But don't get me wrong, before then I was like, hey guys, put a mask on. It'll be over soon. Because that's what I thought. And then once we got to that third lockdown, once I started digging into stuff, once I started seeing treatments getting shelved like bamlanivimab, when I saw that, I was like, no, this is not right. And when they're like, we're going to bring a vaccine to market in a year, I'm like, what? Yeah. Anyway, but my concern was actually more so that, hey, they did this once. They're going to be able to do it again. They're going to be able to plug their holes. They're going to go, hey guys, because they're doing this like with their Pandemic Preparedness Act and all the stuff they're trying to do with the WHO and how they're trying to slide this in through the UN now. They're like, yeah, we're just going to put legislation in place and policy, then we're going to be okay. I was concerned for probably up to a year where I was like, fuck, they got a set of tools right now that they can use against us, and people are willing to just fold up like a cheap lawn chair and follow the rules. And I go, this is a really big problem because next time it's going to be worse. We saw what they did with the bank accounts. We saw what they did with vaccine passports. We saw what they did with all this stuff, shutting down businesses, ruining the economy, bankrupting tons of people. I go, next time it's going to be worse. And they basically pulled it off. But now, again, kind of back to Elon, because we have these social media tools and we can actually communicate, I don't feel that way anymore. I don't feel like I don't think they can pull this off at scale anymore. I think that we would fight back very, very quickly. Enough people will be pushing right away. I think that small sliver of 10% that we're fighting last time would be more like 40% this time. And I think that 40 could convince another 40 in like 2 weeks.
I don't think we can take the foot off or our feet off the gas yet, but I think we're definitely winning this battle.
Yes.
And like they're in retreat. Essentially, the totalitarians are in retreat. Because they were exposed. The hysteria was exposed as people are starting to wake up to this now. Like I have friends that, 3-4 years ago, like they're completely different in their worldview now, in that same direction. I don't think they've gone as deep down the rabbit hole as I have.
Don't.
But
don't.
But they still are just like, oh yeah, I don't trust anything these people are telling me anymore. And
no.
And actually, I made a post there the other day just kind of talking about how Canadians generally just don't have any idea how authoritarian, corrupt, and incompetent our institutions are currently. And somebody was like, yeah, but I think more people are waking up. And I guess the way that I framed it was like, look, people can know to not trust somebody, but also have no idea how dangerous that person really is. And that's how I'm looking at this. Is it's like, it's a great start that more people are aware that this entity, the state and this apparatus, this media apparatus in conjunction with transnational corporations and such, that they know not to trust them anymore. But I still, same thing as what I was saying to you the other day, the depths of evil, man, the depths of how far that machine can go and how it's truly wild when you comprehend it. One of the things that I just, the gaslighting though, it's like they still haven't completely learned yet by any means. I still think they're in denial mode right now, where just today, Joy Behar was trying to slander Joe Rogan as a dragon believer, is what they called him, because you've probably heard him in episodes before where he tries to make it seem like, okay, the concept of a dragon isn't that crazy. Like, we lived dinosaurs. Like, dinosaurs were here. Like,
yes.
Like, why is that any crazier to...
We actually don't know if any of them blew fire or not. We could take a guess, but we don't really know.
And also...
all we have are some bones.
Even if it didn't, like, why is the concept of a dragon more crazy than a T-Rex? Like, it shouldn't be that this one thing is insanely unbelievable, but then this thing is, like,
no,
sure.
It's like a flying brontosaurus that can shoot fire. This is pretty normal, guys. I'm pretty sure they existed.
And so so those are the points that he makes. It's more of like a thought experiment than anything.
For sure.
But then Joy Behar is being like, he believes in dragons on The View today. And then Rogan responded by updating his Twitter bio to Dragon Believer. That's all that's in his bio now.
No, but it's funny. I think that they live in these silos, especially the political world and the media world, where they think that they're the only voice at times and that they have control.
Right.
And even when they're losing control, I think they grasp at straws and continue to fight. I think they're having a hard time with the fact that mainstream media is dying. And for a couple of reasons. First of all, because they're not trustworthy.
For sure.
Second of all, though, because a lot of things are moving to streaming. And there's no real news transition to streaming yet. There isn't. And now I think it's 25 or 30% of Americans now get their news off of influencers in America. I think it's American Stories, but you know what I mean? That's pretty significant. Like, that's a good market for people like you and I. I mean, I don't really consider us influencers, but you know what I mean? Independent media. That's growing. There's no way they can get their hands on this. So they're going to play this cat and mouse game in trying to control Elon, but now Elon's in bed with the most powerful man in the world. So how's this going to shake out? Well, I'd say this. For the next 4 to 5 years, we've got this time to make our way and to rebuild and to set up a strong foundation. So when they come back again with their dragons, we know how to fight them.
Yeah. And so one thing to think about there when it comes to why these people are dying too, I don't think it's necessarily just trust. It's because they're unwilling to make the changes to why people like Joe Rogan and stuff are being, or Elon Musk or Donald Trump are being so successful right now, which is authenticity. Because when you watch them, this is something that the podcast game has changed forever. Is on late night talk show hosts. They had their questions lined up before. Hey, they'd have preppers, like the guests would talk to a producer of the show and be like, hey, here's some interesting stories I could talk. And then that prepper tells the host, hey, here, lead them into this conversation. The entire thing is manufactured.
Yes.
But then when you get to conversations like we're having right now, or like Rogan has with his guests, where it's genuinely just two people trying to sit down and have a good conversation, try to figure things out, people crave that. People love it. Because even if you think about what determines value, even from an economic principle, scarcity.
Yes, supply demand.
Right, scarcity. If it's low in supply, then it has high value. And so authenticity is low in supply, especially the more and more we go down this social media route where, you know, people are filtering and this and that, where people aren't real anymore. Everyone's wearing a face, everyone's wearing a mask, nobody's really them. And same thing with the media, it's all curated. But then once people can have a taste of that authenticity and they can find a hit of it, they're like, oh, this is the real shit.
But you got to realize, so here's why they don't do it. Because they can't.
Right.
Because once you've committed to go down one line, you can't go the other way.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell these, like, you see some hosts like who's someone that's like Bill Maher. Bill Maher does his own podcast and he still does his show. He's one of the few guys that can transition. He's funny, he smokes weed, he talks some shit, he's legit, he's real. You can see the authenticity. He's always kind of maintained that in his cable show as well. So there's a bit of that transition. He's one of the very few guys. It's very hard because most of these people are fake and they're full of shit. And the thing is, you already have this preconceived notion of who they are, and they know they've built their own character that they now have bought into and believe in as well. They can't just turn a page and be like, I want to go be my authentic self. Look at Cuomo trying to do it. It's not going well. It's not going well. And the thing is, these guys are going to run into the same issue. They're like, no, we have a formula. It works. We have the money. We have the power. The media is the weapon. We're going to stick to it. Because if these guys try to be Joe Rogan, they're going to get eaten alive and they're going to have no future whatsoever. And I think a lot of them know that.
Yeah.
Like, I think the thing that you and I have come to realize, this is a long game. When you have the power in the media right now, you want to maintain it. You and I have been talking together for a year, right? This is our 83rd episode. We should have done more. We've been slacking lately, mainly my fault. But, you know, even say we get close to 100 episodes, we're still nowhere near where we want to be. This is not, you know, the starting of this episode was janky and I apologize. I've had a long day. You know what I mean? And this is what it is. We'll be 100 episodes in and it's still not where it needs to be. These people don't have that kind of time. They're not willing to put in years of work like you and I will to hope to get somewhere because they actually want the power. They don't care about the message. They don't care about the impact they make in people's lives. They care more about, I get paid, I'm the guy in power, everyone has to listen to me. That's a really tough transition to make. It's like you and I are climbing from the bottom and we're happy for the journey. We enjoy it. We like what we do. We enjoy each other's company. They don't have those things. They're not willing to step back and go 5 years back in time now to try to climb their way up for a maybe, because the audience will decide if they like you or not. So they're going to stick to their formula. These people cannot transition. So they're eventually just going to die out.
The last thing I wanted to build on, just this kind of circles back to one of the very first points you made, actually, which was talking about the different modes of thinking. You mentioned 3. I think you can actually even just put it down into 2, which is there's 2 different kind of ways to explain it, which would be Daniel Kahneman, who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. So you have your fast systems, which is like your habitual style thinking, your heuristics, these kind of just assumptions you make about the world to allow you to make quick decisions. And then you have your slow mind, which is your like actual conscious. Like, I'm going to think this out. What's the best option here? And how the vast majority of the time it's your fast mind that's in play.
Yes.
It's just you're on autopilot essentially. There's another good analogy of how it works, which is by Jonathan Haidt, the psychologist, and he likens it to an elephant in a rider. He's like, the rider's your conscious mind, and the elephant is your subconscious mind. That's your fast mind. Rider is the slow mind. And he's like, we like to think that we're in control because we have the reins, but at any given moment, that elephant can do whatever the hell it wants, and we have no actual control over it. And so one of the things that I think is really important to look at when it comes to media and how power operates and how these people hang on to this kind of stuff is, and this is why it's like, it's so dark when you understand the world at this level and how these institutions operate. But for time, whether it be the fascists in Italy, whether it be our media networks, all of this kind of stuff, there are people in those institutions that know how to hijack the elephant in other people's minds.
Yes.
And so that and they can direct that elephant to go where they want it to go. They can herd it is within humanity, and the people on the elephant, those who think they're conscious and in control of everything they're doing and thinking and where they're going, have no idea that they're really sitting on an elephant that's being directed by somebody else.
Yeah, it's like any form of propaganda. Anything that makes you go buy Christian Dior or Louboutin or whatever the fuck it is, or, you know, the pair of shoes you're wearing, the sweater I'm wearing. Like, it's just that same thing.
It's literal brainwashing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's a better way of looking at it. It's exactly what it is. But again, like, that's just one more tool, a dark, nefarious tool that those people use that we don't. Mm-hmm. What do? I promote like organ supplements because they're good for you, or everybody versus Trudeau t-shirts because they're also good for you. Otherwise, that's, you know what I mean? Like, there's a certain amount of honesty that comes with the authenticity that doesn't exist in that world, because again, they only care about power over people.
100%. All right. Last up, we've got Trump picks RFK Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services. President-elect Donald Trump has nominated RFK Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services, signaling a focus on tackling corporate influence in health regulation. Kennedy, known for criticizing the pharmaceutical and food industries, plans to address chronic disease, enhance transparency, and curb corporate capture within health agencies. Proposed reforms include banning pharmaceutical ads, restructuring the FDA, and prioritizing public health over corporate profits. Trump highlighted the importance of protecting Americans from harmful chemicals and deceptive practices. With Republican control of the Senate, Kennedy's confirmation could mark a significant shift in U.S. health policy. So, do you think RFK Jr. can start putting American health on the right course?
Absolutely, I do. And I think it's really funny when you've got this portion of left-wing media that are just trying to vilify the guy with every pejorative they can find. And, you know, they're like, oh, he had McDonald's. He's going back on his word. He's the devil. I'm like, guys, yeah, he ate McDonald's. He had to be a part of the crew on the plane. Yeah, I get it. It's a bad look. It was kind of funny. Did you see that photo?
No.
So it was him, Trump Jr., Trump, Speaker of the House, and I think Vance. And they were on a private jet. I think they're going to the UFC, and he's got McDonald's in his hand.
You know what? I did see that.
So like, it's just silly, but like the left lights up. They're like, we've got him all figured out. He's a phoney. I'm like, guys.
I saw that.
Guys.
It was somebody put a really, actually, now that I think about it, I saw somebody put a really funny caption on that photo. They said, when the gang makes you take a little drug so they know you're not a narc.
Yeah. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to objectively look at what I'm actually in the middle of doing a rant for this. So here's what we'll do. We'll look at objectively what he's planning to do. So one, he wants to address chronic disease. So basically, he's determined to combat the alarming rise in chronic disease such as diabetes, obesity, autism, and other conditions that have skyrocketed in recent decades. 2, he wants to overhaul the food and safety standards. More than 1,600 ingredients used in American foods are banned across Europe, Canada, and other nations due to safety concerns, and over 72 pesticides used in U.S. agriculture are also prohibited or heavily restricted around the world due to their health and environmental impacts. 3, implement vaccine safety testing. This is always a contentious topic for everybody. Look, he's not trying to ban vaccines. What he's trying to do is demand rigorous safety testing, because since liability protections were introduced during the 80s under the Reagan administration, no long-term safety tests have been required for any vaccines. So all he wants is, it's not radical. He's demanding the same basic safety protocols applied to other medical products. That's it. Accountability. I'm good with this. 4, he wants to reduce corporate influence over regulatory agencies, like you said. So, you look at, even Big Pharma, they fund 45% of the FDA to the tune of $3.3 billion last year. Over $1.1 billion over $1.1 billion directly funded clinical trials. And when clinical trials are funded by a pharma company, they are 4 times more likely to get the result you want. That's ridiculous. I'm done. 5, end all medical advertising in America. Great. We're not allowed to do it in any other country. They can do it in New Zealand, but it's highly restrictive. So he wants it to stop. And it's not just because they advertise something to you because they tell you it's going to kill you in 15 different ways. You don't buy it, but they're buying silence from the media. They contribute, I think it's 75 to 80% of all ad dollars. So when they do that, they're not telling you to buy the product. They're silencing the noise.
People don't bite the hand that feeds them, right?
It's exactly it. You have no other choice. You know what I mean? 6, he wants to explore alternative therapies, which I love. So anybody that's done a reasonable amount of research knows these things are really, really, like Ibogaine has been really, really good for mental health issues with people that are come back from the military. Peptides, I've taken them. I know they're valuable. Stem cells, huge future in stem cells. Amazing. We're not where we need to be yet, but they're right there. So these are good things to be exploring and good things to be fast tracking. I'm sick of a system that goes, yeah, we know this works for you. Go to Mexico. What the fuck are you talking about?
Well, it's because a patient cured is a customer lost, right?
100%. But again, It's just big pharma influence. Next on the list is revising water fluoridation policies. Now, people are like, oh, it's not bad for you. It is, it's not, it's whatever. Look, there's one massive study we're looking at that says it lowers your IQ, a child's IQ by 7 points. And it's a metadata study. It's not one, it's tons. So give me a fucking break. You know what I mean? We know it's not good for you to consume at these levels. They say it's not good for you. We have the proof. What are we doing? So he wants to get rid of these things. I totally agree. And number 8 is to enhance transparency and public trust. This is a tall order, right? Because pharmaceutical companies spent $36 billion in 2022 on payments to doctors and hospitals under the guise of marketing or consulting fees, very much blurring the lines between medical advice and a sales pitch. Pharmaceuticals are also the 3rd leading cause of deaths in America, contributing to over 100,000 deaths a year. Yeah, that's a tall order to try to rebuild that trust. And I'll wrap it up with this, because I know some people will say, no, everything's fine. I don't think our listeners, but I just want to give people this information. Current data in America. This is why this is so important. This is why. Over 42% of Americans are obese and nearly 75% are overweight. Nearly half of the country has diabetes or are currently pre-diabetic. That is fucking wild. 1 in 5 adults is living with a mental health disorder. 1 in 5 kids is obese. Autism is skyrocketing, now affecting 1 in 36 children, which is insane. There has been a 30% rise in deaths from heart disease over the past decade. Life expectancy has dropped to its lowest in decades, now sitting at just 77.5 years. And 80% of military-aged Americans are considered unfit for service, primarily due to obesity, poor physical fitness, or poor mental health. America needs help. What they're doing is not working, and this guy is trying to lead with courage and conviction. Yes, he's the right guy. Let's see it happen.
Well, one of the things that he pointed out in one of his speeches, I think, was like, look, okay, even if you guys don't think it's the same issues as me, if it's not the same thing causing them, like, can we at least agree on that there is a health crisis here? Like, okay, you're telling me it's not the things that I'm saying it is. Well, what is it then?
So then let's solve it.
Because it seems like you just want to turn around and pretend like that crisis isn't actually even there. Going to the whole media gaslighting and just brainwashing aspect that we were just talking about, the New York Times tried to fact check Kennedy, and so one of the things that he's claimed, and it's right, is that the US allows a lot of ingredients that places like Canada and the EU don't allow into their food. EU is even more restrictive than Canada as well. Yes. So it's kind of like America's really bad with it. Then there's us, and in the EU is actually pretty solid with it. If you go look at their more of their refined and processed foods, then the list is actually so much shorter than, say, the boxed foods that you'd find in our grocery stores. But so the New York Times tried to fact check him on this whole thing. And this is what they said. Mr. Kennedy has singled out Fruit Loops as an example of a product with too many artificial ingredients, questioning why the Canadian version has fewer than the US version. But he was wrong. The ingredient list is roughly the same, although Canada's has natural colorings made from blueberries and carrots, while the US product contains red dye 40, yellow 5, and blue 1, as well as something I can't say, or BHT, a lab-made chemical that is used for freshness according to the ingredient label. And the guy that posted it just, I
You don't even have to say anything. You're just like
rewording these, because he goes, see, as you can see, the ingredient list is just completely identical, except the US product contains formaldehyde, cyanide, and nearly undetectable levels of saxitocin. And you're just like, yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
I think you made a really good point, though. This is what frustrates me with a lot of, so I follow a number of influencers on the left in the health space because I just want to see what they're up to. Like, I like to get all perspectives. Sometimes it makes my blood boil, but that's fine. But it's to that exact point. All they want to do is shit on it and not identify that they've got a massive health problem. That's it. They're like, well, Kennedy doesn't have a degree. He doesn't know what he's talking about. This, and this. It's like, okay, well, I give you some statistics there on how bad the problem is. What's going on then? Well, it's definitely not this. I think it might be, but okay, then what is it? We're not going to talk about that. Well, then shut the fuck up. If you don't have a solution, sit down and shut up.
So the truly insane people on that space is I know exactly what's going through their mind with this ideology, because once you understand the ideology, you can think about how they apply it to every single thing they come across. What do you see within the body positivity and all this kind of stuff? It's like, we don't have a health crisis because we're beautiful at all sizes, right? There's no obesity isn't bad for you. There was the 60 Minutes woman who said that, she was, I can't remember exactly her position, but she worked in the US government high up within the health department. She might have been like FDA director or something like that. And she tried to say, she's like, we scientifically know that obesity is all genetic. And you're like, what? So these are these people. And so they're trying, again, ideology trumps everything.
Yes.
And so it's dangerous. It's like nobody's unhealthy, because health standards are actually really just a white supremacist standard that has been imposed upon society. And that standard has been only existed to oppress fat people. And,
cool. I mean, they're all going to die sooner, but okay, yeah, cool. Yeah. No, nothing corollary happening here.
Right.
Okie doke.
So yeah, it's truly insane, the depths that they can go to. All right. Anything else you want to add before we get out of here?
That is everything.
Don't forget to head over to our Substack, where you can subscribe to the show, get original articles, and our newsletter, which goes out 5 days a week. If you can become a paid subscriber, it would greatly help out and keep this engine turning. Appreciate it. And we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.